Hello, welcome to Post Colonial Space. I'm Masood Raja, and what follows is an excerpted clip from one of my longer webinars. So what I've decided is that sometimes when people ask really interesting questions, I will pull out that particular part of a webinar and make it available to you as a short clip so that if you don't have time to watch a 1-hour webinar, you can at least watch and listen to the brief exchanges that I usually have with people who attend my webinars. So here is one such clip from a recent webinar. I hope you enjoy it. The way I want to set it up is first I would like to give my understanding of it, of the plot, of the main characters, what are my personal thoughts about the novel and why. And then we can open up to a question-answer session and see what you all have to say about it. Our story is set somewhere in the mid-50s and late 50s, right? And it is mostly set in a rural community, Muslim rural community of northern Sudan. These are farming people and villagers who till their own lands and depend on the river for, of course, most of their irrigation and everything else. Now, the plot is interesting, and that is we have an unnamed narrator who has just returned from England after having finished his education in humanities because he wrote something about, an obscure poet. He has just returned to his village. That's the opening scene, and he has taken a steamer from Khartoum to his village, and the entire village is there to welcome him. He's returning after 7 years, and as he meets people, he knows most of them, but he also meets a stranger whose name is Mustafa Saeed. And that is what kind of gives us a hint that it's a modernist novel. Remember, as so many scholars would tell you, at the heart of a modernist novel is a mystery, a secret, right? And what drives your reading is to find that secret. So the dominant strain of most modernist novels is epistemological. The question usually is, can I trust the narrator? And if I do, what is it that this novel is going to reveal to me? So pretty soon then, we as readers become curious about Mustafa Saeed, right? This is the story of Mustafa Saeed and not our narrator, even though he figures prominently. Then through the course of the novel, we get to know Mustafa Saeed, some of it from his own account, what he tells the narrator, the letter that he writes the narrator, and what the narrator finds in the secret room that he had left the key to, right, to our narrator. But most of what we learn about Mustafa Saeed is what other people's opinions were about him from the public record of his trial, right, and his own account of what kind of life he has lived. And a picture of him emerges in our mind, in our consciousness as a person. So that's what drives the narrative. We trying to find out what our narrator is going to find out about Mustafa Saeed, and it is, of course, caught within the web of the local culture, its history, Sudan itself, right? Its geography, the desert, the Nile, but also its colonial history. All of those things are in so many ways determining for us as to how to experience the story, how to read the story. And we'll talk a little more about it. Now, here is what I will caution against. We have developed this tendency, especially in the post-colonies, to always talk about post-colonial texts with reference to their European counterparts. I've read quite a few essays that, oh, he's doing a reversal of Conrad. He is retelling the story of Sudan from the Sudanese point of view. I mean, there is no doubt in the novel that it is tracing the impact of people's life through the colonial trauma and also in the post-colonial nation state. But to just simply assume that Tayeb Salih is somehow using Heart of Darkness as an analog and then telling an Arab story, I think it does a disservice to Tayeb Salih himself. Okay, I mean, Tayeb Salih can tell a story. He doesn't need to make it, analogous or analogous or whatever you want to call it. He doesn't need Heart of Darkness to tell a story. Okay, and we should not fall for that tendency all the time, that somehow it's a rewriting. It could just be an original story, right? Even though it deals with questions of colonialism and colonial identity. The second mistake that we must not make is to read one or two characters as a representation of the Sudanese culture or the Arab culture or the African culture. Okay, there are hints in the novel where it is pretty clear, and I will point to that it teaches us that whatever Mustafa Said does may have had something to do with his experience as a colonial subject, but it also has a lot to do with him being a psychologically damaged person. Okay. And so in that sense, then, instead of reading him as an outcome of a colonial experience, which makes the colonial experience an over-determining feature and makes him into the malehood of Sudan, we could also read it just like we read in any other European novels when one person transgresses, has mental illnesses, we deal with it as a mental illness, right? Or as a flaw, right? So keep that in mind. In my opinion, if you read Mustafa Said's actions and writings and his self-description, he comes across to me more as an existentialist, right? Closer to Albert Camus' The Stranger than to Heart of Darkness and Kurtz. That is my reading of that, and I can explain it further. So these are some of my thoughts about the novel. Now, one thing, and you can put me wise on it, I have not read it in Arabic, right? But the translation, right? Even though it's an English translation, one thing comes across beautifully to us, right? That this is a beautifully written story, right? And I think there is a reason that Tayeb Salih, who was fluent in English as well as in Arabic, that he decided to write it in Arabic, right? And someday I do hope to read it in Arabic and understand it, because I think only then will I be able to capture the whole story. Okay. So plot is pretty simple. Our narrator has come back from England after his higher education. He's gone back to his village, right? He will eventually end up working for the newly freed Sudanese government as a civil servant. But he's visiting his village, and while he's visiting his village, we are introduced to certain characters. We are introduced to his childhood friend, Majub, who works in the fields, is slightly high school educated, but who is active in the politics, right? Local politics. We meet his grandfather, who is a resilient figure in the novel. And we meet Mustafa Said, his wife Hosna, right? We meet Binte Majzoub, right? The older woman who hangs out with his grandfather, Bakri. And then we meet Wad Rais, right? Who is part of the climactic ending of the story arc. Right? These are the people we meet. And then the story, part of it is we trying to follow the path of our narrator, which is peripheral to the main story because he goes to the city, he has children, and he gets married. But then there is this interspersing of information about Mustafa Said, and then his death, and he leaving his children and his wife in the care of our narrator. And then the forceful marriage of his widow Hosna with Wad Rais, and she refusing it, and finally killing him and killing herself. That's the climactic ending, right? And then our narrator at the end goes back, opens the secret vault, and finds out that Mustafa Said had created in that room a European room with all his conquests there. Women, the 4 women who killed themselves because of him, and the murder of his wife. And the last scene where our narrator, driven mad by his sense of loss over Hosna's death, but also maybe despair, jumps into the river, maybe to commit suicide, but at the last moment, the last lines of the novel are help, help. He has decided he's going to live. So he's struggling to get back. And we know that he's already close to the riverbank because he can see the water mills, right? And that also is a modernist ending, right? Because, it's unresolved. We hope that he makes it. We hope that he lives a meaningful life. So that's roughly the plot. Thank you so much for watching or listening to this brief clip. If you are interested in the longer version, the link will be in the description and you can watch the whole webinar. Thank you so much for your support. And as always, if you have any questions, any concerns, you can always post them in the comments and I'll be happy to respond to them. If you have a moment and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so now so that you get timely notifications of whatever is happening on this channel. Thank you for your support. Stay safe, and as always, from me to you, peace and love.